Baltimore City Council Budget and Appropriations Committee. We're here for our fourth session of the day, 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. Homeless Services. We've got the Mayor's Office of Human Services here. I am joined by Council President Jack Young to my right, Councilman Ed Reisinger from the 10th, Councilman Robert Stokes from the 12th, Councilwoman Shannon Sneed from the 13th, Vice President Councilwoman Sharon Green Middleton from the 6th, Vice Chair of the Committee, Councilman Leon Pinkett from the 7th, Councilman Bill Henry from the 4th, Councilman Ryan Dorsey from the 3rd, Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark from the 14th, Councilman Brandon Scott from the 2nd. To my immediate right is Marguerite Curran, staff to the committee. Tom's in the background still shadowing Council President Young. He's had a very eventful week. Kara Kunst, Legislative Director for Council President Young in the back. No one from the mayor's office, but I'm pretty sure I know what they're doing right now. Mr. Hickey, you can just sit there and hang out if you want. No need to get up, or whatever you're more comfortable with, sir. Terry, if you could, everyone make sure you speak in the microphone. If I interrupt you politely or impolitely, either or, it means you're not speaking in the microphone. The reason for that is we are filming this live. We also have Dewana Starrett and Melissa Broom. Ladies, if you could find the two most comfortable of those 7 seats over there. And Terry, if you could introduce your team, and we'll get rolling.
Would happy to do so. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And one last thing, Terry, if you just keep your presentation to 5 minutes, we want to jump right into questions from the council. Thank you, sir.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. I'm excited to see a full house for what's a very important and critical issue. The team I've got with me today is Amir Asadi, our finance chief, and Chris Rafferty, our deputy director, who's been with the department several years, as opposed to my few months. So if I defer, it's with respect to getting the right answer. So I want to go through a few things. I've noticed something pretty quickly that's going to sound a little cliche. This is a complicated and somewhat intractable problem, and people come at it from very different directions. And everything we do in homeless services seems to have a distinct ripple effect. And so what we have been focusing on over the past several months is making sure that we have the right people in the right positions, that we're working well with other agencies, we're being collaborative, we're listening, and we're thinking about HUD regulations and HUD funding and state funding and how we can do a better job to move funding that we have access to. We're by far a federal and state funded agency. About $10 million of about $50 million is general funds, and most of that goes to emergency sheltering, which you'll see. But as you know, the Office of Homeless Services sits under the Mayor's Office of Human Services. We're the designated lead agency for the continuum of care. Every HUD-funded jurisdiction in the United States has to have a continuum of care board. What's really unique about this is the COC board ultimately makes decisions about where the HUD funding goes. We are, in effect, hired by the COC board to execute on these decisions and support the homelessness community and the provider community following local policy and best practices. We administer about $37 million annually for programs. That includes street outreach, emergency sheltering, transitional housing, rapid rehousing, which is predominantly rental assistance, short-term assistance for people to get them into housing quickly, opportunities for persons with AIDS, HOPWA, the meal program, and eviction prevention. Each year, through a network of over 50 partnering agencies, most of whom are funded through our office, we work to deliver services to over 25,000 individuals and families. On any given night, approximately 2,700 people are homeless in Baltimore City. Of those, 80% are staying in emergency shelters, safe haven housing, or transitional housing. 20% self-reported staying in unsheltered locations. That would be vacant houses, cars, on the street. For youth, it could be any number of places. Over the course of a year, 10,000 people experience homelessness and receive some kind of emergency housing assistance, permanent housing services through street outreach, and thousands more receive basic needs assistance through our drop-in centers, meals, clothing, showers, etc. If you want to break down our housing inventory, 59% of our housing inventory is permanent supportive housing. Emergency shelters make up 27%. transitional housing 16%, and that rapid rehousing I talked about is 8%. Personal statement on this. I think we spent a lot of time talking about what we're not doing well, and I just want to be clear on some of the areas that we're making headway. We reduced veterans' homelessness by over 30% in 2 years, working closely with the VA, utilizing their housing for vulnerable veterans. We've implemented a housing first practice. That's the idea of getting people off the streets into permanent housing quickly with the proper supports. The less time you spend in emergency shelters, the less time you spend in transitional housing, the more chance there is that you get stuck. And the theme behind this whole discussion today is really about flow. How do we keep people moving through the system we've created into permanent housing and do it in the best way? Having really nice shelters that are full of people all the time that aren't going anywhere aren't a good solution. We've developed standards of care and cultural competency standards for all of our service providers. For the first time ever, we guaranteed winter sheltering this year. Anytime the temp was hovering near 32 degrees, you were guaranteed a bed in one of our emergency shelters or an overflow that we had opened. And thanks to those of you, many of whom on this committee, who worked with us to help that happen. We awarded 3 new rapid rehousing projects through HUD as a net increase of $1 million. We launched 2 new permanent supportive housing projects for the chronically homeless, 60 units for vets and 55 for non-veteran households. We were awarded a new grant for youth rapid rehousing. It's an incredibly exciting new area to make sure that older unaccompanied youth get into housing immediately. That came from the state. It was an increase of $75,000. We allocated an additional $150,000 to street outreach, which is one of the secret keys to how we deal with the homelessness situation in our city. People on the streets who get to know the homeless, help them, link them to services, counseling, and support. We're, of course, right now almost finishing the mayor's work group on homelessness that's set to make public recommendations to the mayor in the next 2 weeks. We have a strong elected continuum of care. Councilman Stokes, Pete Hammond, Jason Perkins Cohen, and others all sit on that COC, which has come a huge amount ahead in progress over the last year. And then I may be the most proud of something that just happened this past week. We were one of 5 cities in the United States named to be 100-Day Challenge to End Youth Homelessness cities. It's a huge honor. It recognizes that we're making great strides forwards on our plan to end homelessness for youth. It'll be a 100-day, all-hands-on-deck process towards getting as many unaccompanied homeless youth housed in those 100 days beginning in June that we can. I don't want Baltimore to be known for homelessness, right? Nobody wants that. We want Baltimore to be known for what it's doing to address and solve the issue. And I think this is one of those first aspirational steps. So with that, I certainly want to turn it over for questions and discussion. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present that.
Thank you, Terry. Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You alluded to how many partners that you all fund. Is there any breakdown or any records you could give us of how many of these organizations have housed people from homelessness to housing? And what is your scoring mechanism to make sure that the money that we're giving to these outside agencies is actually doing what it's supposed to do?
Sure. So quick answer is yes. I can provide you with detailed records. I'll provide the committee with detailed records on where the funding goes into what partners. If I can, Chris Rafferty oversees our monitoring department. I think it might be helpful to have him spend a minute talking about how we review and monitor the programs that receive funding, Mr. President.
Sure. We put together a detailed monitoring process to make sure that all of our recipients are in compliance with all the federal and state requirements. So we have staff that go out and monitor on site all of the files and review all the documentation to make sure these organizations are in compliance. We also have a requirement that every provider that receives assistance must submit information daily into our homeless management information system. So we track their performance. And that's how we make our funding decisions. That's how we make an evaluation of how effective their program is. Okay.
We just want that information because we hear from other homeless advocates that, these agencies are not doing what they should be doing, putting people out after a certain length of time with no permanent housing in sight. So that leads into my next question. Can you tell the council how long someone needs to be in temporary housing before they can be moved into permanent housing? And what, if anything, does your office do to prepare someone to make that transition?
Okay. So to your first point, Mr. President, I think what I've noticed about the work we're doing is that there's some really uncomfortable, complicated discussions we need to have. What HUD expects to see in a homelessness structure is that flow that I talked about. And so a discussion that's ongoing right now, and other counties, other cities, other states have dealt with it in different ways. There doesn't seem to be one standardized solution to this, is do you have formal discharge policies for your temporary service providers? Is it okay to be in an emergency shelter as a family or an individual? Is it okay to say, or should we be telling clients, you can stay permanently or indefinitely? We have families that reject housing solutions. We have families that have very unique needs. I will say this, we do not have a single provider that I've been able to document, and we follow up pretty vigorously, that discharges clients from family shelters, for instance, without either having them not followed through on their case plans or rejected the available housing options that were there. And in fact, we've put a stop to any discharges without full vetting from our office. So our first concern is to make sure nothing falls through the cracks, first and foremost. As to your second question about, I'm sorry, Mr. President, I was so excited about your first one. Could you repeat that second part?
What, if anything, does your office do to prepare someone to make that transition?
Okay. So, do you want to?
One of the responsibilities of the providers is to make sure when somebody comes into their facility, they have a housing plan developed for that particular family or individual. So, and it has very detailed steps about what the client must do to get themselves into permanent supportive housing. It's one of the challenges that you have different people that are willing to participate in their own solution and others that are not. So it's a very difficult situation for the provider sometimes, where they have a client that will be there but will not help themselves, through the process. And that's one of the challenges they face and we face as a COC.
Okay. Well, look, ever since the fencing of the staging location at Martin Luther King and 40, some homeless citizens have resorted to staying in dangerous location. Just last week, I saw a tent set up in the steep grassy area on the Maryland Avenue bend on the JFK. What is the Mayor's Office of Homeless Service doing to promote awareness and outreach and ensure that homeless citizens can get to temporary housing?
Okay, that's another great question. So I will say that the individuals that were moved out of the encampment at MLK, that occurred about simultaneously with my coming into this agency, and that was one of the first wake-up calls I had for the complexity of the system. So the folks that were there were moved into hotels. Our understanding was it had become a safety and health issue and really threatened to boil over and dominate the discussion of how we handle encampments moving forward. We right now have no closing encampments. If we have a policy, it's not to close them. I've made clear to every Councilman Stokes at your meetings, I've made clear if there's an encampment clearing somewhere in the city, it didn't come from our office. The challenge is, Mr. President, we don't have, as you know, we don't have the housing resources now to move people as quickly into permanent housing as we would like. And people have many reasons, some of which very valid, for not going into our emergency sheltering system. And so people resort to encampments. And that is a hot button issue in every single city, and they've dealt with it in varying ways. And we've been looking at different options, none of which have shown perfect results. Outreach is the key. What happens is when a tent goes up, the first thing that should happen is somebody out there speaking to that person about why are they there. We've had folks in tents 100 feet away from a facility with empty and available beds. We do monitoring of our emergency shelters. We try to make every attempt to make sure that our partners are running them in the way that they should. Emergency shelters can certainly be improved, but as the head of HUD Services for Homelessness just said to us, emergency shelters are bad enough. You shouldn't be staying in them long term. But the challenge is outreach. We need people out there having individualized conversations. We have 4 full-time outreach workers right now that we're able to pay. We have put money, or 7, I'm sorry. We have 4 in the budget to increase that to 11. The real number we need out there is 25. And so until we can increase outreach on the front end to reach people, and I'm not talking about outreach meaning people being told to go out and say, you've got to leave. I mean outreach saying, let's talk through what your issues are and let's connect you, wraparound services, building trust. You know, these are folks that by very nature don't have a lot of trust anymore, and that's fair. And on the other end, we need to develop these permanent housing options. Rapid rehousing, you're going to hear a lot more about. The ability to raise money to pay for short to medium term rental assistance to get people immediately into units, and I hope some pressure on the landlord community to work as partners to figure out how to provide safe temporary housing to people while we find long-term permanent solutions is going to be the key, and we're very much going to continue to try to work on that.
Because, you know, I held up money to several providers because I felt that what I was seeing throughout the city, they wasn't doing their jobs. Because anytime you can see homeless people sleeping right at the doorstep of health care for the homeless, that's a problem for me, you know. And they'll tell me that they out there with the outreach, but I can't see it. And I said it to the executive director on many occasions. They sleep on their steps. I mean, if I'm running that, I should be pulling those people in, and I should be figuring out what it is we need to do to help them. If they have mental health issues, we should refer them or take them to wherever they need to go to get that mental health issue taken care of. If it's drug addiction, they should be referring them or taking them to a drug rehab center. Whatever the issue is, if they are veterans, they should be connecting them with veteran services because it's out there and it's available. So I'm just hoping that you guys could really put more pressure on the organization that you're funding to really get out there and do what they're supposed to do, because if they're spending our money, I want our money to be well spent, okay? And that's about all. But with our youth fund, that's going to be in play for fiscal 18. What we're doing is for organizations who really don't have the technical assistance, we carving out a small piece of that money to help them with the technical assistance. So that leads to my question with the organization that's ran by Ms. Flowers. She gets out there and she gets those homeless people and she gets them into shelter. All the other stuff that goes on, I don't care about. I don't know whether it's true or false, but she's providing a service. And it seems to me if there's an issue with the technical assistant piece, why can't we work with her, real care providers, and offer that technical piece to help her? Because she's really making a difference in trying to get homeless people off the street. And I get sick and tired of the emails because it ain't nothing really that I can do but put pressure on you guys to try to do what you do as the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services to help get these homeless people into stable housing.
Thank you, Mr. President. And real quickly, to hit a couple things, I've engaged in a conversation with Healthcare for the Homeless. Mayor and I spoke about it as well, and I'll keep you posted on the results of those conversations. Secondly, we have a capacity issue throughout our homeless service provider industry. We have one of the more challenging capacity issues nationally. And the idea is, how do we help more, particularly smaller providers? You know, youth is tough enough. In the homelessness services, the amount of bookkeeping and the amount of cash on hand you have to have, and the idea that if you have a bad month, it's not about paying your employees, it's about not being able to afford the rent assistance or having to put people out of your own property. So we have plenty of those stories of providers that had big dreams that we ended up having to replace those folks. Since you brought it up, I'll say this as a model for others. I've spent an incredible amount of time talking with Ms. Flowers. I respect her passion. She has every cell phone number that I possess and uses it. We want to be an open agency. We want to turn our focus on helping people do things right, not simply being a monitoring agency. So to that end, HUD's a tricky partner. 78% of our funding comes from HUD right now, which is unacceptable, but for the time being, we're a bit at the mercy of their regulations. If you don't operate a transitional or emergency housing program properly, you will change that individual's codification under HUD to non-homeless, and they will no longer be eligible for permanent housing. So we've had very detailed conversations with Ms. Flowers and others about how, if they want to, first of all, no side doors for funding. We don't want to run an agency where there's side deals, and I know you all feel the same way. We want everybody to be able to come and ask for funding, so we're providing folks with a written list of what they need to do to conform to one of the different models. In this case, it could be transitional. Depending on where she wants funding from, it could be emergency sheltering. It's up to her and her board to decide they want to go in that direction, and I'll keep supporting her in that effort. So thank you for bringing that up.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I actually just have one brief question. Mr. Hickey, we know that this coming year we're developing a municipal ID program, and you know that folks who are unfortunately homeless are a big focus of the reason why this body passed the bill and the legislation, so we can open up even more doors and opportunities for those individuals. I'm just curious to see how you think that your division will work with us, or how you think you should work with us to make sure that we get as many of those people the IDs as possible.
Thank you, Councilman. You know my background as a law professor and an access to justice person and a jobs person. And so there's some things we haven't done in the past. I mean, I could say that we support the idea and all of that, but we need to do something specific. We're working with Baltimore Core now, and some planning dollars we have available to bring on a fellow to work on connectivity to jobs and barriers to jobs. We're looking at IDs. We're also looking at issues of child support as two big barriers and what we can do. We're working with MOED to make sure that the mobile units that hopefully will be in place at some point under the mayor's vision will have specific outreach capacity to do this type of thing. And I've just started looking into, I understand that there were some deals made about the ability to get IDs for a reduced fee that I need to research more, that haven't really, I've heard outreach people complain about how they can't access that. And so I need to figure that out as well. But it's going to be a priority for us, and I hope that's a good start working with you. Oh, I'm sorry, the PIT count. We've started building in more questions about employment in the PIT count and what barriers are. And you'll be interested to know that in last year's PIT count, one of the questions was, do you want to work? 87% of our unsheltered homeless said uncategorically in their PIT count questionnaire, I want to be working. I think that says something.
Mr. Hickey, I just had a couple questions. And I'm not certain which service number this would cover, but what's the amount of money we use to house homeless persons in hotels?
So that would come out of our emergency sheltering fund. Mm-hmm. Do we have a total right now where I'm glad to provide that? Since I have been the head of human services, we have housed approximately 6 people in double occupancy rooms at low-cost hotels for a few months. I won't do it again. Okay. I felt this was a unique circumstance. I think hotels are the road to doom. If you look up hotels and homeless in any other city, it's horrifying. We are working on bridge housing options where we can keep people close to services in an area that is not a hotel. I'm with you, but we will get you the amount that has been spent on that due to the closing of the MLK encampment. That's the only time hotels have been used under my tenure.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
I'm glad you know where I'm going, so yep. I don't have to go there.
You can quit.
My next question, I guess, is related to Service 893, and then maybe also 894. So let's start with 894. The expenditure listed as eviction prevention and rapid rehousing, how much is associated to each activity? Or do you consider them to be both? I mean, to be one and the same? Right.
They're not the same,
right?
But I don't have the breakdown. We'll have to get that information to you.
Okay.
Yeah, I can absolutely do that.
Because part of the reason I'm asking is it's clear in Service 893 that there's a budget item for eviction prevention. That's on page 201. About 288,000. So how many clients does that that amount serve?
That, again, I don't have the details on exactly the number of clients that would be served. What we do try to do is limit the amount of assistance per client at $1,000 for eviction prevention.
$1,000?
$1,000, that's correct.
So that I'm clear, excuse me. Because if you limited it to $1,000, that means that we are forcing people to go to multiple resources, correct? Because there's no way that you can prevent eviction with $1,000.
That's our goal level. We will go higher depending on the circumstance, but we try to limit it to $1,000. And you're right, we do. That is an issue that we are aware of. We're trying to address.
Yeah, because this is your field. I don't know it, but $288,000 cannot be enough money for City of Baltimore to prevent evictions.
Correct.
It's no way.
Right.
We should just say that we don't do eviction prevention.
See, one of the challenges we have is the main funding we get from HUD under the COC program is we cannot do eviction prevention. We have to use the Emergency Solutions Grant or state funding to do eviction prevention.
And I mean, that cannot be, once again, I could just be generalizing. I don't claim to have knowledge in this area, but I would imagine eviction prevention has to be the best strategy to prevent homelessness.
Unfortunately, this is where I think better collaboration between the different agencies, a lot of the resources you're talking about fall under housing.
Okay.
And so what we need to do is develop that connective tissue between housing and us. Once a person, it breaks my heart. I get phone calls from people that I've met out that say, I'm about to be evicted. And under the rules for most of our funding, if you are about to be evicted, we can't help you until you have been evicted and are now actually homeless. And so let's give it the full gravity it deserves. I've been talking with, that we are doing a hiring process for housing and there's some reorganization. It is an absolute priority for us to be more seamless with housing about how we do this.
Right.
We've also talked about the opportunity to do more, this is coming from us, more opportunity to do housing eviction work in our CAP centers, which would also mean making sure that we're doing more in the West Side.
Got you.
But your point is incredibly well taken. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Councilwoman Sneed.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if you could just walk me through, because even when I'm at community association meetings, we get phone calls from mothers and children who say, hey, I need help. And the first numbers that I tell them to call is like 211, and they said, we've tried that, we've done that. I'm calling as a Baltimore City resident. So can you walk me through, I guess, when you guys receive the calls, what you then do for these mothers and children?
Right, and we do get those there's been an uptick in the amount of families that we've got calls. Now, a number of those calls are coming from folks that say, I'm living in an unstable environment, I'm living with somebody who may be kicking me out, I'm living in a domestic violence situation, something I've got to get out of here. Each of those kind of come with a different tag, and what we've tried to do, even if they don't, I want you to understand, it's not a matter of we don't say to people, you fall under our funding stream or you don't. We try to make referrals quickly to places like House of Ruth, domestic violence shelters, and others that we work with, and our outreach teams have access to all of those. If you are homeless or you need a place to stay at night, you need emergency sheltering, we do have that option. We've got Sarah's Hope. We have some other, during the winter months, we pay for additional emergency housing. Our outreach teams, so we get a call. I want to make sure I frame this the way you had framed it. We get a phone call. The first thing we have to figure out is, what is the situation leading to this? Are they going to be homeless soon? Is it a eviction? We'll call housing. If there's a domestic violence situation, we'll call and do a referral to House of Ruth. If we're not sure, we'll send an outreach team out to do an investigation of the situation. We hate to direct families that have any other option to emergency housing. And so outreach teams will work with them to find out, do you have relatives? Do you have friends? Sometimes there's been a situation where they're having an argument and don't want to call somebody, they're embarrassed. A lot of these are informally worked through. But you can also call 311. 311 route back to us, and 211 is an option. Numerous times, though, Councilwoman, I will track these back, or my team will track back the calls, and we'll find out that they didn't want the help that they were offered. Sometimes the best was an emergency shelter option, and they didn't want it, and then the next call will be, I wasn't helped. So they're very difficult. I think working towards a unified response system is something we need to do. Thank you, very good point. So what we are on target, and this is coming, but what we're on target to do between now and January is a coordinated access system, which is mandated by HUD. It is still for people that enter the homeless system, so it doesn't apply to all the calls you might get. But if you are self-declared as homeless, you would be entered into one system, and there would be a no wrong door idea, where every place you go, you're directed to what would be the best place next. Is it an emergency shelter? Is it family housing? Is it a rapid rehousing model? Is it directly into a permanent supportive housing? Every agency has to work through the similar database, and we'll have a team whose job it is to connect that together. We've just brought in a consultant to help us bring this together. We have a COC committee working on it. We should be fully accessible or fully on board with our coordinated access system by January of next year, with about another 6 months to fully integrate that into our sheltering system as well.
So for two of the phone calls that we gotten, the sad thing was both places, because she was homeless, nowhere to live. She was literally on the street, and they told her she would have to separate from her children. She would have to leave her children to get the services. And I said, what in the world? That we want families to stay intact, and I know it's not your problem, but I felt like as a city, why aren't we doing more to make sure that families stay intact, to make sure that the kids get to school and that life seems normal even though this family is going through a hard time? And then I go back, again, not to go on a tangent, to say, I wish we would have had your department to stand with us from minimum wage, because the people in our district are living paycheck to paycheck, and that one paycheck can make that family homeless. And so I wish we would do more for when folks call, that we can do something right away for families, mothers with children. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Stokes.
I serve on that board with Mr. Terry Hickey, but I started a new group because since becoming a council person, I've inherited some homeless surrounded by the Doghouse restaurant. So we've been having quarterly meetings with the downtown partnership. The police department have a group that go out to deal with substance abuse and homelessness. So from my little experience, and Mr. Hickey been doing this for a while, we were able to have a conversation at the last meeting about, we deal with homeless, but we don't deal with, you have people that feed them. They have to go to the bathroom. So we talking about providing some spider pots in the designated area for homeless people, because around there by the hotel at Gay Street, we hear that all the time. We hear it from the Doghouse, because when you feed people, I mean, people gotta go to the bathroom. So, and I was just telling Mr. Hickey the other day, I had a call from a gentleman who has a hotel in the Gay Street area, and going to talk to Mr. Jones, Anthony Jones, and Mr. Hickey. He actually wanna hire some of the homeless people, and that's what we should start looking at, because we can't keep putting them in temporary housing if they don't have employment. So I'm looking forward. I think this is a good idea, but we got to deal with the food piece, because you got a church feeding them, another group feeding them. So we want to come up with a designated area to where they feed them. If this church want to feed on Sunday, that's their day. This church want to feed on Tuesday, that's their day. But we still, when we feed them again, it goes back to, they have to go to the bathroom. So me and Mr. Hickey talking about sit down and talking with some of these people that own spider pots and have a designated area for the homeless people to go to the bathroom. But the real piece is the employment piece. And there's a new group that's in my district called Better Tomorrow, starts today, and they deal with mental health. So we bringing them on board. So I think we kind of had to refocus how we deal with homelessness, not just temporary stuff. And when I got the call from the gentleman who owned the hotel, I was really excited about that, because he didn't have a problem with hiring some of those persons who now can come out of that homelessness piece and get employed. That really helps out. So I'm looking forward to the working relationship with you also.
And I want to thank you, Councilman, for setting up meetings that could have become about unloading on service providers and instead have become around looking for mutual solutions. And there are any number of really fantastic sounding programs out there. There is a group that takes double wide porta potties and reconditions them to homeless short-term housing. There's tiny houses. There are mobile spotta pots. And they're so unique to each area, and they have to be developed. You could spend a lot of money. Millions of dollars in California went to tearing up solar-powered self-cleaning toilets for the homeless that became hotspots for drug dealing and sex trafficking. And so finding programs that actually work here that don't have a ripple effect that we're not thinking about, I'm glad we're thinking through all of those, and we're looking forward to being a partner.
Councilwoman Middleton.
Thank you. I guess my question, I know that there's an organization in my district, Loving Arms, Inc., that is a wonderful organization that I'm very close to, and they deal with runaway teens. And I noticed that's an increase in population of homelessness and running away. And then also, I have a population, transgenders that have problems with housing. They're on, just because of who they are and still not accepted in society. They're within the homeless population. How are there places that the city, where they can go in the city, or what type of outreach do you have for this population?
Right. So, and I'm very familiar with Loving Arms. I think one of the biggest challenges around youth is that they don't respond well to traditional modes of homelessness prevention. They won't go to traditional shelters. We've been working, I think, with Loving Arms to make sure that how can we develop models that young people feel comfortable going to. There are some very interesting models. Rapid rehousing for youth is the future in some sense, utilizing rental housing stock for older youth, getting them into their own housing. They respond very well to that. There's a program coming online in May called Host Homes, where folks are screened and trained and given a stipend to provide bridge housing in their home to youth who are waiting for rapid rehousing slots to keep them safe. This is going to be where you're going to start to see if I'm a family that has experience with a transgender relative or child or themselves, there's going to be a much more holistic environment there. Power Inside is a group that they've not provided emergency sheltering. They provided day sheltering and counseling and support. We need to do more in those areas. We need more for youth. We need more for specific populations. We've been trying to do more for vets. And I think as we broaden, it goes back to the comment about capacity. We need groups that are out there with ideas to do this, to help build capacity so they're able to apply for these federal dollars.
Councilman Stokes.
I just have a question for you, Mr. Hickey. Last year when we came onto the council, there was a study done on homeless teenagers, and I've been trying to get it for a long time. Would you have it, and could you share it with the council? Because that is a big issue right now also.
Do you know what study that's referring to, Councilman?
I don't know. Whoever your predecessor was, they had already done the study, but I couldn't.
Talking about the count?
The
reach
count,
count? Oh, that was done in April, and that's all going to be available soon. I'll make sure everyone gets it.
Okay.
That is, by the way, for folks that don't know, we include youth in the PIT count, but it's been seen to be hugely unreliable because of where youth actually are. The youth reach, we do it in schools. A number of our homeless youth are going to school every day. We hire young people that are formerly homeless to go out and participate as well. The numbers are much larger than we've got, but it's a more accurate count. Still not quite there yet, but I'll make sure that everyone on the committee and the council gets the results of that study.
If there are no further questions, this hearing is in recess until 5 p.m. when we'll receive presentations from the police department. Thank you.
Thank you all.